Hi, welcome back to the Dr. Akinde Breaks It Down video series. This is episode 7.1, Coronavirus, Explained for Kids. So it turns out that there's a pandemic going on around the world with various orders and attempts to have people shelter in place so that they don't spread the virus so much to each other. Everyone's talking about this phenomenon of flattening the curve, which is a way to try to make sure that we prevent too many people from getting infected and sick too quickly, which then can overwhelm the medical systems in various parts around the world and cause even more problems overall. So the point today is that we want to make sure that kids kind of understand what the virus is and how it works. So today I'm going to make an attempt to paint a picture for the kids to help them understand the reason that it's important to try to stay calm about having to stay indoors for so long and having such a change going on in their daily lives. So it's really, really important to understand the nature of a virus. A virus it's not really a living thing, kind of like other living things, like bacteria and protozoa and fungi and animals. Those are all living things. They're either single cells or clusters of cells or billions of cells. The thing about viruses is they are the simplest form of life or non-life. So what do I mean by that? So they're really, really small, microscopic as we call them. That means you basically need a really powerful microscope to be able to see a virus. But the thing is, it's even simpler than that. That's something you can just point a microscope at and see. A virus is simply genetic material, which can be DNA or RNA. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. It's what they call the genome. It's the blueprint, the instructions for how a cell should be built. RNA is a type of genetic material as well that's similar to DNA, but isn't really the same thing because there's a small change in one of the parts that make up DNA. And when that change happens, it's called RNA. RNA is ribonucleic acid. The thing about RNA in viruses is it can act essentially the same way as the instructions for replicating the virus, just like our DNA acts as the instructions for copying our cells. So viruses contain either DNA or RNA. They contain a membrane, which is called a phospholipid bilayer. And what that means is that it's kind of like a fatty, tiny little thin fatty layer that goes around and is a bubble around the RNA, the genetic material. And then viruses are tricky because, well, if all you've got is genetic material and a fatty bubble around it, then it doesn't really have any way of getting into the cells. So what happens is that the virus has also these proteins that stick out of the surface. So proteins are another kind of, you want to call it a molecule. And they are very specific, meaning that they have a size and shape. And that size and shape is there for a reason. It helps the RNA to do a certain job, or it helps the virus to do a certain job. It has a job to do in order to help the virus. I think that's the best way to say it. So what the protein does on the outside, it's a coating. What it does is it attaches to the cell. And in some way or another, it causes a reaction in the cell's membrane itself. And actually, the cell membrane is very similar to the virus membrane in that it's a phospholipid bilayer. And so the cell has other ways of keeping foreign things out. It has a lot, the general cell, our cells, have a lot of different proteins on the surfaces, and they detect whether or not something is similar and is self, or if they're foreign. And so the body responds and reacts depending on how it senses things. Viruses get around that by finding a way to poke a hole into the cell, into our cells. And then the membrane just kind of blends into the cell membrane, and it dumps its RNA right into the cell. But that's not the end of it. So then what happens is the genetic material, the RNA or the DNA, depending on the type of virus that you have, the RNA, this instruction manual, finds a way to get itself into the cell membrane. Sometimes it has little proteins that help carry it along. Excuse me, not into the cell membrane, into the nucleus of the cell. Excuse me. So it finds ways that, to carry itself or get it carried either by itself or by the cell's very own proteins, carry it to the nucleus. Because the nucleus is where the magic happens. That's where the cells, the instructions are, the manual is opened up, essentially read and copied. And so it has to go into the nucleus, the center, the main brain, main computer control center of the cell. So it goes in there, it gets replicated. It just basically, as it does this, it hijacks the cell. It takes over the cell. All the stuff that the cell was doing before gets essentially stopped and changed into, it basically hacks the cell. All right, that's the way we speak now. It basically hacks the cell into creating more viruses. And this isn't just, oh yeah, the virus is gonna double itself and make two. It makes thousands or millions of copies of different portions of what the virus needs to become reassembled as a virus. Because remember, it's used its protein to get into the cell. It's melted its own cell membrane in with the viral membrane in with the cell's membrane. And so now it's genetic material floating around, getting into the nucleus of the cell in order to replicate itself, in order to make copies of itself. And then eventually it takes over the cell. And now the cell also has a factory kind of system where you take certain things that are done and taken care of, and you move them to the next stage. It gets really complicated. You can look it up, the portions of the cell, things like Golgi bodies and endoplasmic reticulum and all the rest of that stuff. It's fun stuff. So the virus hacks the cell, takes over everything that's going on in there, and gets the cell to make more virus. And it makes so many viruses that then the cells sometimes just explode. Like literally, they have so much virus in them, like they just bust out. And sometimes what will happen is the virus would then also use the cell's membrane to package itself. It just all depends on the virus and what system it uses. Viruses are different. But coronavirus works similarly to the simplest of the viruses. And so it packages itself back into the cell membrane, and it has its proteins sticking out again. So now you've got, of course, the RNA inside the cell membrane and with the protein sticking out. So now you've got a brand new identical copy of the previous virus that went in times millions. And so then these viruses get into the bloodstream eventually. Right? All the cells are connected to the bloodstream. The bloodstream, from capillaries to veins and all kinds of, and the arteries and all that system, they connect to the cells. That's the point, is to deliver nutrients to the cells and to bring waste products out of the cells. So as soon as they leave the cell or they rupture the cell, then the viruses find their way into the bloodstream. And here's where the fun part happens with our immune system, or maybe not so fun part, depending on how much of a problem there is with it. The immune system always has white blood cells circulating around. The reason your blood is red is because of the hemoglobin in it. You always have red blood cells floating around. You also have white blood cells, which are different in shape than the red blood cells. They're more kind of bubbly, and they can change their shape much more easily than the red blood cells, which don't really change their shape. But the white blood cells, they are constantly moving around. And there are white blood cells for different parts of the body. The skin has its own types. The liver has its own types. The brain has its own types and things like that. But in the bloodstream, the white blood cells are floating around looking for trouble. I like to think of the white blood cells as the police in the body. They're looking for things that don't look right, things that don't seem to be part of self, like viruses. And so once the white blood cells detect the virus, they kind of engulf them, phagocytosis we call them. They eat them up. And then they take them to the regional lymph nodes of the body around where they found them, like the police station, the precinct. And what they do there is they process them. They chop them up, they kind of study them, and try to figure out, okay, what should we do about them? Including creating antibodies, which are proteins that help to identify and keep a memory of the type of protein that came from the virus. So the body makes its own proteins. So you can think of the virus body, the proteins on the virus, as a body. And then the body makes its own proteins, the antibodies, which lock on to and figure out exactly the shape of that protein from the virus, which is how we make vaccines. We grab proteins from a virus and we put that into the body so that the body can make antibodies against just those proteins, because that's enough usually for the body to detect what's going on, see the type of virus, and recognize it later before actually attacking the entire virus. You don't need an entire virus usually to generate an immune response. So when people say that they got a flu vaccine and it gave them the flu, it's not true, because the flu vaccine needs RNA to replicate itself, to multiply, and then to make you sick, because you get that sick feeling from the body's response, a massive response. So since the RNA isn't there in the flu vaccine, then you don't have that cascade, that bunch of different things happening. So while you can get sick during flu season, and you can even get sick after you get the flu vaccine, it's usually from something else. It's probably not the flu vaccine. It takes a lot of convincing to get people to understand that. But when we give you the flu vaccine, we're really trying to help to make sure that your body's immune system is ready for the fight against those viruses. So back to coronavirus, which works similarly to other viruses, except that it has its own places where it prefers. So it prefers like the what we call the respiratory tract, the nose, the throat, and the lungs. And so that's why people have nasal congestion and they cough, usually have a dry cough, and it can lead to pneumonia or SARS, which is severe acute respiratory syndrome, which is essentially, your lungs really going bad. They're not working very well. And then you need to go to the hospital and to be seen and to be checked by somebody who knows how to check and treat that kind of stuff. So what we're ultimately dealing with is this virus that gets into the body and causes the body itself to react by trying to find, capture, and defeat and eat up all the virus parts. And as the body's doing that, the inflammation is the body's own response with different cells, including especially the white blood cells, causing a response to what's happening. It's like, you have dirt on the floor and you want to clean it. You pour a lot of cleaning agents all over the floor and then you mop it. And eventually you clean that up, but you still got to kind of make a mess before you can actually clean up the mess, kind of thing. That's, in a way, what inflammation does in the body. But in some people, especially older people, the body's response is not enough. And then the virus causes so much of inflammation that it can be dangerous. So right now we're asking everybody to stay sheltered in place, not to go out and visit other people, because while you might miss your friends, you might pass something on to them, but you might catch something from them. And that's the hard part. So we want everybody to be thinking about how we can help each other out. All right. So we don't want anybody to pass the germs from one to the other. So just like I'm using a camera and social media to communicate with you, I hope that this can be one way that people can also communicate with their friends and their family, and especially their older parents and grandparents, because direct contact with them can be dangerous for them. They can get really sick. So we want to make sure that we're preventing that. That's the point of all of this. So I just want to say, from the way that the virus is, to the reasons that we're doing what we're doing, we're using science to figure all this stuff out. Viruses are not easy to see. You can't see them anywhere, but they can land on surfaces because we talk and we spit while we talk and we cough sometimes and we sneeze sometimes. And by doing that, we're spreading the germs. So that way, if somebody has already walked through a room or touched something 2 minutes before you got there, you can't see how they've left all kinds of things that can infect your body. So that's why we're asking you to keeping your hands clean. Either use hand sanitizer or use soap. Soap and water is great for cleaning viruses. It actually works ridiculously and very well. All right. So please wash your hands or use hand sanitizer. So doing all of that helps us to reduce the spread of germs. So one, we try to avoid catching germs by touching surfaces. And then we also have to avoid touching our own faces, because remember what I said, the coronavirus is a virus that actually likes the nose and the mouth and the respiratory tract around here. And speaking of respiratory tract, I don't know if you guys can see this. This is today's t-shirt. It says, "You are Jollof. Don't let anybody treat you like plain white rice." Shout out to my cousin for that. She sent me this t-shirt. Jollof is a type of rice, which is of course, you know what rice is, but it's a West African tradition. For just about any occasion, jollof rice is included as part of the meal. And see, what had happened was, the story goes that the Senegalese invented it, but everybody knows that Nigerians perfected it. So there, if you thought there was any debate, it's been settled. Ghanaians do but the Nigerians already perfected it. So is what it is. Go get you some jollof rice. So back to the topic at hand. We want to make sure that everybody shelters in place long enough that we reduce the transmission of the virus, and that we don't make it dangerous and difficult for people who take care of sick people, right? Because if everybody's getting very sick or getting sick a lot, then you have to go see the doctor a lot. And every time you go see the doctor, especially if you're sicker, that makes it more likely that you could pass the germs to the people who are trying to help you. And if you pass the germs to them, then that means you could make them sick. And if they get sick, because they're people, right? They're humans just like everybody else. If they get sick, then it can be dangerous for them. And if there's not enough doctors around, who's going to keep taking care of the sick people? We do this for each other. Let's always remember that viruses are a social disease. Sure, we can use science to figure out that they're tiny, tiny little, maybe alive, maybe not alive organisms, but they're a social disease. They need more than one person. There's a thing we say in biology that viruses are obligate intracellular parasites. So that means that they have to have a cell. They're obligated. They need to have a cell that they can go into to take over and hack the system in order to make more of themselves, right? So what we need to do is to help ourselves not to fall victim and to get sick from this virus in particular. Viruses work similarly, as I said before, with some exceptions. Some of them are a little bit more contagious than others for various reasons, but the general way that they work is what I wanted to explain here, and then why we're doing what we're doing. So we ask that everybody do their part, keep their hands clean, avoid touching their face, and then avoid passing the germs to other people. It's the best we can do at this time so that we can keep everybody safe. But of course, remember, this isn't medical advice, right? When something's affecting you, you should go see your own doctor to make sure that they're taking good care of you, and that you talk to them about what's going on with you so that you can get the best care that you can. This is information that helps you, hopefully, to make good decisions about your own health. Sometimes we don't have enough time at the office to kind of have these conversations, so I wanted to make sure that I explained it. And I hope that the kids get something from this, because that was the point. I asked the parents, of course, to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, ask questions, and all the rest of those things that they say on social media. I appreciate you taking the time to take a look at this and give us more ideas about topics that you would like to see and hear about. Thank you, and keep yourselves well.